about shame, shame, shame. It's the name of her game. There's so much to do, and we're gonna speak true. So many to blame, blame, blame.
Hello and good afternoon to everybody out there who might or might not be listening to us, although if you're not listening to us, you have no idea what I'm saying, so I can say anything I want.
That's a good start.
We're here today to do another episode of our podcast, Shame on You. And because last month's podcast had so many people thinking about so many things, we're going to kind of continue the theme we were talking about the last time. So this is kind of like, Uncharitable Part 2. Mm-hmm. We do have a different voice representing the for-profit sector, sort of. Tom can actually speak for both sectors, but our dear colleague Tom Andreesen is back with us after a brief absence. My husband is home sulking because he doesn't get to be on today. And we have more to talk about because this is a subject that, it's just never gonna be ended satisfactorily, and we're gonna be returning to it more than once. But today we're going to continue our discussion of the themes that Dan Pallotta mentioned in his book, Uncharitable. So Tom and Laura and Derek and myself are going to do our best not to repeat ourselves and, rack our brains for our latest and most creative thinking on this subject. So while we're doing that and racking our brains, Derek will have some news for us to update you on what's going on in terms of gathering support and resources for this podcast.
So we have exciting news. We have our first sponsor of the podcast. We have Verbal Commitment, and they are going to be announced in our January podcast. We also are going to have a donor portal live for the podcast. We're going to have all our social media pages up and running, and we've got a full roster of very, very esteemed and awesome guests lined up for 2024. So I'm very excited about that. And so yeah, that's the main updates. I think a good place to start, refresh some of the audience's memory. Last podcast we talked a lot about. We hung on the Puritan thing for a long time. We did linger on the Puritans for a while.
They're really a big reason for a lot of our problems.
Yeah,
but it's okay.
And besides, they're always so fun to blame.
Yeah.
Shame on you, Puritans.
I can go there.
That was their favorite thing to say.
Probably.
Right. Good old.
Or does that make me a Puritan?
Yeah, right. Good old Christian guilt.
But as Ernie pointed out, it predates them.
Yeah.
The idea of mankind was evil and one must redeem him or herself through good works predates the Puritans. So thank you, my husband, the historian, for that. You're not going to let me forget it, so I thought I better mention it.
Yeah. Well, Ernie set a high bar, it sounds like.
Yeah, he did.
And he gave the best speech ever. I was fired up and ready to go. He gave like a war. He was like comparing like different wars and figures in war to like the nonprofit world, and he's just like rallying the troops. And I was just like, Ernie, I'll follow you into the battlefield. So shout out to Ernie. But I think a good place to start would be I found somebody that kind of put together some notes on Dan Pallotta's book Uncharitable, and it was the 5 components of the problems nonprofits face are compensation, advertising and marketing, taking risk on new revenue ideas, time, and profit to attract risk capital. A lot of big words. So I'd maybe defer to Tom on this one and Tom's experience working with resilience, like maybe hone in at one of those things, like when you were helping lead that organization, did any of these come up? Were they all a problem? Like, what's your feel on that?
Well, I think, not-for-profit organizations, like in the for-profit world, struggle at times with you kind of keep doing things the same way. You kind of get caught up in, hey, we did it this way last year. We do it this way every month. We do it this way every day. Mm-hmm. And I think that, like any organization, you need to instill new ideas. You need to have fresh ideas come in. Sometimes that can come through the existing employees, but sometimes it's hard when you don't have new, fresh ideas coming from the outside. Mm-hmm. It's hard to get out of the so-called ruts that you remain in. So I think that organizations have to always challenge themselves with, how do we look at something differently? How do we bring a fresh way of approaching our constituents, our stakeholders, with something that might be new. And so I think the idea of, constantly being in touch with your stakeholders, whether that's financial stakeholders, whether that's the individuals that you serve and provide services or a product to, I think that's, you've got to continue to be in touch and survey them, ask them what new ideas they might have, what ways can you better, bring those capabilities to bear. I was reflecting coming into this discussion too we just got through Giving Tuesday, and I'm sure a lot of us had our email inboxes filled up with a lot of, hey, have you thought of us? Have you, given your contribution to
organizations I haven't heard from in about 5 years?
Right,
Follow me again.
Yeah. And I actually took time to try to open up emails from organizations just to look at, what stands out to somebody that's getting their inbox filled. And I found that there was a amazing amount of looking the same yesterday on Giving Tuesday. So what and again, so how do you attract and get creative that email stands out, that could be different from somebody else's and make me feel compelled to give at that moment versus, hey, I'll just give it at the end of the year.
Words won't do it. And that's a writer saying this, folks. I struggled with, when I was running Awakenings, I struggled with that every single year. I always just, I'm an excellent writer. I've got lots of history and personal connection on the subject. And every year I would write what I thought was the absolute perfect, Giving Tuesday ask. And it never made any difference. It never made any difference. So it's like, it goes beyond, stop thinking about crafting the perfect message.
Yep.
You're going to have to take it a step or two farther and just kind of like restructure thinking about the campaign.
Right. Yeah, it's a hard thing. How do you getting attention and thinking like, how do I change somebody from a reader to a giver in these situations? And everybody's got a attention span of us, like
Great Pitch Awakenings next.
140 characters.
Yes.
And
I'm like, ooh, a squirrel. Yeah.
Yeah. and so that I actually enjoyed going and looking at these things, these emails arrive in my inbox yesterday. And I quite honestly didn't see a lot that stood out to me. It was kind of like, here's our mission, support us.
Yeah.
Here's how the money might be used. But it was actually phenomenally bland, I thought, this year with what I was receiving. So I kind of looked at yesterday as a little bit of this challenge that organizations have, but how do you stand out? If you don't have somebody already committed to the mission, to the cause, and we're in a world of AI now, right? ChatGPT, how much?
Well, I think they probably wrote most of those emails.
You think so? I was wondering, Laura.
Yes.
I was guessing that maybe, they might not have, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think Giving Tuesday is a really good example of, maybe an easy entry point for some organizations that don't have really big, robust fundraising departments or efforts already going. The Giving Tuesday people kind of have this prepackaged logo and messaging, and there's a lot of free resources out there. So I think it's a nice thing. But I mean, to be honest, I don't think anyone's getting first donations from new people on Giving Tuesday. I mean, those relationships really have to be established so far in advance. I mean, the golden number, I think I said this last time, is that a person has to be asked 7 times before they give a gift. So if Giving Tuesday is your 7th, then maybe you'll get something. But guess what? Then Christmas is less than a month later.
Right.
And, from Awakening's perspective, when, speaking about differentiation, which I think is, the perpetual problem that any business, for-profit or nonprofit, faces, is our donor base is actually not even big enough to double tap twice within 1 month. So we actually skip Giving Tuesday. Instead of sending out these email campaigns, what we do is we do an art supplies drive. We say, hey, you know what? We're not going to send you these emails. Instead, look around your house. I guarantee you have boxes and bins of untouched art supplies that you bought during COVID that you never touched. Donate it to us because we can use that to help provide art workshops for survivors. Great. And then guess what? In 3 weeks, I'm going to come back and ask you for money. And it plants the seed. Yeah, and it plants the seed. And I think it's a much, I think it's refreshing to people because it's a way they can feel like they are really providing support for something in a very specific and visible way.
That's a great idea.
Well, Tom,
That's why they pay me the big bucks.
as you remember, you and I had a couple of years of shared history with the organization whose board you were chairing. One thing I never really asked you, and I'm curious about it now, given the new thoughts I've had along this theme, is what was the makeup of your board in terms of like what percentage of people were there from the for-profit sector as opposed to the nonprofit sector, the educational sector, whatever, other than you?
Yeah. As I reflect, I think that we had probably almost a 50-50 makeup.
Okay.
For profit, not for profit.
Yeah.
And I personally valued the not-for-profit colleagues on the board because I thought I learned from them. It's just some of the challenges that I might not have been aware of. Some things that I look at, go, why don't we try to do it that way? What are some of the challenges? And so my for-profit mentality needed to be refined at times and better educated as like why certain actions came into play. One of the things I think that we, I think that's challenging that I saw was just the programmatic emphasis and funding for that versus, monies that we could use and creative ideas that could generate money in different ways to help fund programmatic. But I think there's always an interesting tension maybe between,
how tactful a phrase.
Yeah. And I get it. I think I get it. I think I learned a lot with the tensions that can exist within an organization and how to look at ideas, refresh ideas, come up with new ways in how you invest money, potentially, and raise money to support.
I mentioned that because, I probably talked about this last month, so I won't go into it much again, but, I have totally revamped my entire giving strategy, as somebody who, makes significant donations in this mission area and only in this mission area. I mean, I've got this three-pronged approach, and one of them is I need to attend a board meeting, or if you have more than one board, I need to attend 2 board meetings. And frankly, it's one of the things I'm looking for. I don't want to see a board where everybody is from the nonprofit sector. I want to see a real mix of people because my giving these days is just almost totally focused on growth and sustainability.
Yep.
And I am looking for organizations that have what I feel is the ability to do more than just keep putting Band-Aids on wounds and survive whatever the governmental funding cuts are going to be, because they're never going to stop that.
Yeah.
So, I was just thinking about, our shared history at that organization and thinking, oh, Gene, you never asked that question of Tom. And refresh my memory, you were the board pres there for
2 years. Yeah, 2 years. Yeah, we actually changed it because at the time when I took over, it was a 1 year, so we changed the bylaws to be 2 years because 2 years is extremely difficult for an executive director.
1 year is ridiculous.
Yeah, and it's hard to, I think, get things done and have an agenda versus just being a place.
Most of the similar organizations that I've dealt with, they do not have that. Z Center, CAC, they don't have term limits for officers.
Oh, interesting. I'm a term limit fan.
Or board members. I mean, obviously there needs to be something, but 2 years is not enough.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, 2 years is hard, but I think I believe that the term limits help promote the fresh thinking, bringing new ideas in at the board level, and I appreciated just myself being around others who, it helped and motivate me, and I felt like it's a opportunity to learn from others, but also bring 2 ideas together that might be different and see what you can get from them. So I appreciated the change. I'm sure it was tremendously hard. I gather on the staff and the executive director to constantly kind of be, okay, now this person's in this seat. What are he or she's ideas, and trying to adapt to that, whether it's financial related, marketing, et cetera. And talking to Laura and understanding from her just, the challenges and opportunities that an executive director faces, a leader of a not-for-profit, the challenges of having a changeover in board. I certainly can gather though how challenging that can be, to your point of 2 years is not enough for certain types of roles.
You weren't here the last time, but I think I heard from from Derek or Laura. You were familiar with Dan Pallotta's book before we started talking about, we got to do a podcast on that. You were familiar with it. How long was it? how long had you been? How long had it been since you read it for
3 years.
the first time?
Yeah.
Was it?
But I got refreshed because I think Laura
was it-
brought it up to me, and then Derek brought it up to me.
See, I found it revelatory, not the ideas, but just that these ideas were so entrenched.
Yeah.
I mean, what was your reaction? You've spent years in the for-profit sector building businesses and helping people build businesses. I mean, were you kind of struck dead, or did you kind of already know that stuff?
I think you realize it, but then seeing it in print kind of is like, oh, kind of get it. I think it's just it's a great book because it challenges you to think like you're seeing these things happen, and you kind of like, oh, it kind of hits you in the face from the perspective of why certain things are happening and decisioning. I think that what I find is that as a board member, I got involved as a board member at some point based upon somebody saying, hey, you seem to have an interest in the mission, and then you get on a board. What I've found in the for-profit world, and then even with my own organization, we trained our leadership up and put them through board training. And people don't have an idea what expectations are as a board member. And a lot of times they come in as a board member without any sort of formal training. May not even have had exposure to a board.
They're just passionate, right?
Yeah, they're passionate. And I find that being a board member means asking good questions, bringing up ideas. But there are responsibilities that you have as a board member that a lot of people just don't realize that you are supposed to live up to, and who you represent as stakeholders, whether it's for profit or not for profit. And I found that, and I'm trying to, my not-for-profit boards now, trying to bring training into perspective of, there are certain things we should know how to do as a board. There are certain things that we should live up to. There's certain understanding around bylaws and why we have bylaws. I just don't think a lot of board members, quite honestly, understand. And then also, when it comes to the fiduciary responsibilities as a board member, things like why should you think about long-term investment funds as an organization? What sort of cash should you have on hand for? And what amount of balance should you maintain because of those challenges you might see where you're not going to get funding from, if you're heavily reliant on state federal funding and grants. Like, what if you don't get that? And I think, in the state of Illinois, we experienced that with one of the administrations where they couldn't pass a budget. Therefore, nobody was getting funding. So all of a sudden, you started to see the stress that put on organizations. And so having an idea of a board member, the fiduciary responsibility and setup that you can better put an organization in place just with that, what you should be doing just with that responsibility. I find that a lot of boards don't have that and haven't thought about that, and their bylaws don't reflect that.
You and I were talking about things that we didn't cover last month, and some things that, and how we didn't want to repeat ourselves. I'll bet you could weigh in on the issue.
Yeah.
Because I know, when I look back on my years with Awakenings, I always considered it maybe my second biggest failure. You know what my first one was. I always thought it was kind of like my second business.
That's behind the scenes.
I just never felt like I came even close to putting together a halfway decent board. It's really, really hard. I found somebody who was, who could at least take us to the next step for a while. And because she was a long-term friend, she was able to serve as a board president, because I couldn't even find somebody that would do an effective job at that. And I know things have changed a lot. Laura has done a much better job. Could you weigh in a little bit on some of the things that Tom has been talking about here? Because he's talking about an organization that's, it's significantly larger than Awakenings was at the time.
Yeah. I have a lot of thoughts about boards. I mean, first of all, I think the dynamic is inherently flawed. You are bringing in a group of people, both as volunteers, but also as supervisors of the C-suite position. So, from my perspective as an executive director, I feel like every board I've had, in the last 10 years, I have actually had to manage them like employees, but they're in charge of my compensation. So, and I'm very lucky, you know, to have wonderful relationships with my board and have some wonderful board members, but it's really tough. And I think it's always going to be one of the toughest parts of the role. That being said, I think, you know, something I've really noticed, and I'm not sure if this is unique to Awakenings, I really don't think it is, but I have a lot of people that find us and are interested in board membership. And I think back in the day, you know, when someone came through and they have, you know, experience from a different sector or a different type of business and they come in, I'm like, yes, exactly. God, please. But where I'm at now and having gone through many board members and learned a lot more about the sector, when someone comes in and they are just amazed at what Awakenings is doing, to me, that's actually an automatic bad sign for a board member, because there is something inherently static about that person. If they're coming in because they're really enthusiastic about our programs, let them volunteer. Let them do a little crowdfunder for us. Let them donate themselves or participate in some other way. What I'm looking for in board members, especially since we're kind of hitting this period of growth, is someone who is going to look at this business and see its potential and help me get there strategically. And so someone who's coming in that's just, oh, I just love the mission. I love this work. I want to be around. I'm like, amazing. Come hang out with us. Come be part of this. I need to save my board seats for some real strategic thinkers. And that's both from the nonprofit and the for-profit side. I think we maintain a pretty strict 50-50 mix. So
Really? I mean, that's a goal, not an accident.
And
it's a goal.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
And I'd be curious, Laura, on the mix of people too, and the network. I look at again some of my experience where people find people like themselves to replace them on the board. But I think that where boards miss out is a network. Like, what is that person bringing to from a network perspective? Access to other corporations, access to other individuals who might be contributors. And as I again and continue to learn about being a board member, I don't think the right questions get asked. Like, it's like, you know, individual contributor, like, hey, I want my board to be able to live up to financial expectations. How much does the give get, and are they going to be able to do that? But I think that where boards miss out is, or organizations miss out is asking board members, like, tell me about your network. Tell me about others that you can bring in. Yes, you're going to have a get perspective from them, but what other access can you bring as a board member that will allow us to maybe be in some new circles, to allow us to be tapping into new sources of revenue? Then what kind of events will your network be able to bring me to, that where I might be able to bring other people? And I'm not sure that my experience, I haven't done a good job probably personally bringing and asking those types of questions, but I'm curious, you know, from your perspective.
Yeah, well, and that's our job. And I think, you know, I definitely ask my board members that. And I think it's really a question of sustainability, because in addition to, you know, what network, what resources, what connections can you bring into the organization, how do we keep them here once you leave our board? And I have also not yet been able to achieve that because we don't have a fundraising staff, but I think it has to be baked into the entire strategy of the organization. You know, when you bring on a board member and they bring in some friends to your fundraiser, or maybe host a dinner or do a connection to a corporation, your fundraising staff needs to do everything possible to bring those people into the fold so that they are not only interacting with the organization through that board member. They need to be passed on to other staff members, other board members. They need to come to programs alone, you know, and that's really how you kind of cultivate a donor base. Because otherwise, you know, when you leave a board, you're going to take all those people with you, and then they're going to donate to the next nonprofit whose board you serve on.
Right.
So it's really challenging, and it takes a lot more resources than I think a lot of the smaller nonprofits have, but it's, you know, it's all about forward long-term thinking.
You know, it all goes back to, you know, some of the themes of Dan's book. It's like, this isn't how they do it in the real world. This isn't how it's done in business world. You don't hire somebody without looking at their history. You don't, when you bring on an employee, you look at their connections. The idea that we are recruiting board members, which, you know, it really is like a group of employees. I don't know what the exact comparison would be. Would it be, you know, your sales team or your marketing team, whatever? That's in many ways what your board is supposed to be. And here we are, once again, as Dan keeps pointing out to us, trying to set up a totally different set of rules for the nonprofit sector, which don't make any sense. And I was really struck by what you said, Laura, about the whole concept being flawed, because I never really thought of it in quite that way before, so thank you. You are asking a person who's making a salary that isn't even probably half as much as they should be making if you've got a good ED, and you're asking them to recruit people who are going to be responsible for your salary. I mean, that's just so backwards. I can't imagine why that particular part of it never occurred to me.
Well, Laura has enlightened you.
Yeah.
And us.
Well, Laura and I don't see. We don't talk as much as we used to. No, it's not my fault.
Yeah, I will say the board. I did not learn that from Uncharitable. I don't think he really gets much into board dynamics, but it's something I've explored a lot of in my coursework. And one of my professors does a lot about board engagement, and it's been really interesting hearing people from tons of different experiences, nonprofit, for-profit, as board members, as EDs. How everyone really, really struggles with this. It's just the flavor that's different across, different organizations. I mean, I consider myself really lucky. I think, again, the way that I have learned to engage board members is more on an individual basis. And I actually think that's because of Awakening's history. When you are a really tiny, scrappy organization, a board member is going to come in and they're going to help build your capacity, really. So I really came into my leadership position with board members being what we called working board members. So rather than a give-get, they're bringing, maybe someone works for a marketing company and is going to do some messaging work for us, and that is their contribution. So instead of just a check, they're actually providing some work kind of in the day-to-day operations.
That goes back to the days when we just didn't think we were going to get anybody who was actually going to give money.
Exactly.
And it's like, okay, what can they do instead?
And that norm, and boards have norms and culture, just like a team has norms and culture. That has actually kind of continued on and been really challenging, because I've had trouble recruiting board members who do have the fundraising chops, who do have the network that can really get that contribution, that like on paper contribution up. But I'm getting a ton of people that really have great ideas for projects that they want to kind of provide. And it's difficult for me because I'm like, here I have this board of people who are helping in these individual ways. But I really, really want to move to a board where I have some of that, but I also have some people that can actually just write a check.
Yeah, right.
And one extreme or the other is not very good. I look at some of these much bigger, more established organizations, something like the Art Institute, where the board members are maybe really not driving strategy that much, but man, those checks must be big. And it must be so nice to just rely on, an inner circle like that to provide you with an X amount of funding. But of course, I'm thinking about it from the perspective of a really small fish. I'm
equating it once again to the for-profit sector. I mean, you don't need any more people making widgets. You need a sales force.
And what's also, you start to transition board-wise from hands-on seats to a true governing board, where there is governance, there are lines of demarcation between how involved they do get. And I think that's just an evolution, that the boards go through with organizations in the not-for-profit world. And it's a hard one, because when you make that transition, all of a sudden you might lose that, oh my gosh, I don't have anybody to fill that void from that talent perspective that board member was providing. They're writing checks now. Oh my gosh, which way do I want to go?
And often I think the transition to a real governing fiduciary responsibility board is usually an incident that forces that upon them.
That's right, yes. You're right, Laura.
Yes.
Well, I'm curious too, and what I've been through a couple times now, hiring a new leader for a not-for-profit, how do you go from, there can be a swing with, hey, I want to hire somebody that can network, that can raise money. I'm not worried about them being as good on the operational side, versus I want a great operator. I want somebody that knows how to run programs, but they might not have the skills, the depth on the fundraising. And I've been through that a couple of times now, where organizations and the board are saying, I want this time, I want this next time. It's a difficult one as well, because it seems like trying to find the balance in the individual that can balance both sides is able, where you can find them, or you don't have to pay an extraordinary amount of money to get both. So I don't know, again, Laura, from your perspective, and you do both, so you're amazing.
There's only one Laura.
There's only one.
Yeah, I have a lot of opinions about this. It's funny. I talk about this a lot. I think for an ED, I actually think the networking and fundraising part is the most important, because if that person cannot be strategic, cannot be driving the organization towards a common goal and cultivating the resources to do that, then you're just a ship floating, not moving anywhere. On the flip side, though, I hear what you're saying. I mean, I think the bulk of the operations, in a nonprofit should be under the program director, whether they call that person a COO or a program director or whatever. But I think, like you said, I definitely appreciate my own ability to be able to jump in and get my fingers dirty. And I think every ED should be able to do that and, could take out a trash bag every once in a while.
That's right.
But I also think, and to kind of build on that, I think that the relationship between those two people should be very, very close, because at the end of the day, your strategy comes through in your daily operations. It's not just about the goals. It's not just about the data you're collecting. It's about the choices you're making on the micro level every single day, how you work with people. And if that's not there, then those two things are just going to float farther and farther away from each other. And I think all of us have seen nonprofits that have a huge rift between the program people and the admin people. And it's, it's really culture building. And, there's this famous phrase in the business world, that culture eats strategy for breakfast. If your culture is not set, you can have all the goals in the world, all the plans to get there, everything set in stone. Your culture will destroy that if it's not good.
I can remember way, way back, and when I very first started granting, so I guess we're talking about, 1999, 2000, 2001. I can remember I was so frustrated because I just didn't get it. I was looking at EDs, and I just felt that one or two of the ones that I was working with most seemed to me they worked 10 hours a week. Because I knew, they had private practices in addition to being ED of whatever. And I can remember asking my one friend she's still my friend, but she has a CPA and an MBA. And I said, what is an organization looking for in an ED? And she said, the ability to do the work. And I thought, oh, okay, maybe I see that. And then a year or two later, when I met the person I still consider to be probably the most dynamic ED I ever met. And I said, why are you the ED of your organization? And she says, because I'm a terrific fundraiser. So there, in the space of 1 year, with two organizations that I was very closely connected to, in the same exact small mission area, I got two diametrically opposed answers.
Interesting. That's really interesting. Can I bring up a topic that, as a board member, I think I lost a few sleepless nights over time. And I'm curious, Jean and Laura and Derek, your perspectives. So going back to long-term investment funds. So one of the boards, we were able to establish that. We were put in, take some money and say, you know what, we're in a great financial position. We've got enough cash, that meets our requirements bylaws wise. If we need to, we need to have that sitting there in case we face financial difficulties. We had a good fundraising. But we said, this amount of money, we should put it in a long-term investment strategy. I mean, we selected a financial advisor to help us figure out the investment strategy around that pool of money. But what, as a board member, as fellow board members, we struggled with a little bit was programmatically, the program team looking at us and going, operations team, why would we not funnel that money back into the operations? Why would we not invest that back into hiring more people, expanding our services, greater outreach to individuals? And it was one of these things where I personally struggled a little bit because it seems so clear, why would we not have a long-term investment fund that if we need to, we tap into and it will be able to fund long-term things, but to plow it all back in immediately just didn't seem like the right strategy. So I'm curious for the three of you if my sleepless nights appropriately felt, or should I have been, no, you didn't need to lose sleep, Tom. That's a damn good strategy.
I'll do a quick answer and then turn it over to Laura, because this is something I've thought about a lot too. But the thing is, you set up some kind of endowment fund, and unless you're giving them $50 million, what are you going to get? A couple $1,000s extra each year from the interest? You compare that to what you think you could get by, adding a staff position, adding a counselor or two, adding an art therapist or two. I mean, I can't even conceive of somebody who is so incredibly balanced that they could get past that. You know, do I invest it in the organization, or do I invest it somewhere that's going to give me a couple $1,000s extra a year?
So now you're making me feel guilty, Gina. Thank you.
No, I mean, I'm just saying it's like buying insurance.
Yeah, right.
You know, you pay for insurance and you pray you never need it.
Right. Yep.
But you're paying through what feels like paying through the nose for something you may never see the
never need
benefit
it.
of. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm more in the long-term investment camp. I think, and here's why. Let me try to be articulate about this. I imagine for me, if we had several good years in a row and maybe got a couple huge major donors, and I had just all this money sitting in the bank, I would for sure take a little bit of that and meet any immediate needs that we had organizationally, whether that's another staff position, maybe a little bit of raises, etc. However, I wouldn't take all of that money and use it to build out programs that we had not already planned to grow. I think if there was already a strategy in place and movement towards, just say we want to double our in the case of your nonprofit, if we want to double the number of counselors we have for the people coming in by this date, I could say, okay, well, that means that we wanted 3 more in this year. I'll use a little bit of that money to hire the 3 more because that was already part of the plan. What I would never do is take that money and say, we're going to,
Hire 5.
hire 10.
Yeah.
Because to me, that's not sustainable. And also, and I'm sure, their budget was the same, your expenditures are growing every year incrementally, even if you do nothing differently, just because of, rates going up. So the organization is growing, and so is your ability to make more money every year. So if there's that huge surplus, spending an entire big bucket of money in one year, what are you going to do the next year?
Yeah.
Because you're not going to have that big bucket of money again. So again, I think there's maybe a little bit of middle ground where you can take some and fill the holes and maybe start something on the path towards growth. But I would say that, my God, I mean, that's what so many of us wish we could have.
Yeah.
I think it depends on what's the financial picture of the organization. But I'm very much, just in the little bit I've learned about nonprofits, especially in our missionary and just in general, reading this book, I'm like way into sales and marketing. We got to set, I view fundraising as sales, as we're trying to grow the podcast, as we're trying to grow like the people from the organizations that we have on the podcast. Like obviously we're very invested in everybody growing. And I really think I would put it all into just continuing to grow the sales force, which is your fundraisers, and how do you just donor outreach? Like how do you structure those relationships? Because one of the things that I wanted to, get your guys' input on was a couple questions like the bane of nonprofits' existence is they have a overhead crisis, and then when they're going to their donors are like, what percentage of my donation goes to the cause versus overhead? And I think that's like another conundrum that nonprofits face is we need money for operations, we need money for everything else, but the money needs to go to the people that are in need. But like the more we grow the organization, the more funds we have available, the more we can do the investment funds, the more people we can help. Yeah. So it's just everything's colliding. There is a lot of tension.
Yeah. It is. I kind of liken it to, universities. When somebody gets a building established, they give the money to build the building and they have their name on the outside, but they don't give the money to maintain it. Right. It's kind of that similar thing.
Right.
You have this big, glorious now facility where people are using it, but unless you keep the lights on, keep the heat running, that building means nothing. So I kind of look at it. It is a challenge, and I think that I guess again, somebody that's donated, I'm okay with it going both ways. I'm okay with it supporting operational aspects. I'm probably less inclined because I just don't probably give as much money as some friends, but I probably get less caught up on personally and as a board member. I think you have to get benefit out of it, but you have to realize that you need to have the core, keep the lights on, keep things running. And I think that most not-for-profits realize that you can't have a show
Right.
You have to meet the mission. And I think I've found that there's good stewardship and great leadership that makes sure that happens, that money's not going to be misallocated, at least from a board oversight and a donor perspective, is my experience.
Yeah, now I've got some weird thoughts, which leads to a weird question for Laura. If you've got, if you're a small, struggling nonprofit and you don't have your strategies perfect yet, and you have a donor base or people on the board who are in this mindset of everything for programs and nothing for administration, if you have an endowment fund, does that even make it worse in the mind of that kind of person? It's like, well, why do you need money? You've got X in the bank. Why did you put all that money away last year when you could have, hired an extra therapist? Yes, you thought you had the budget for 3, but look what happened. We weren't able to do that. I mean, would it ever operate as almost like a negative?
Well, first of all, I think a regular old individual donor is not getting that transparent of a view into our finances, first of all. So, that's probably not something that they'd be thinking unless they're really, really close into the fold. From an institutional funder, however, I've seen actually both sides of this. I think, when we were first starting out and almost exclusively funded by you, that was a huge detriment to getting other funding because we were set up, we were submitting grants for things, and they would request a budget, and our operating budget, and they would see, oh, you're entirely funded by your founder. Why can't you just give more money? So I had to start telling this very
legitimate question.
Yeah. Well, and I actually don't fault them for it because, I think looking at an organization that's getting all of their money from one source is not a very sustainable organization.
That's not.
So I had to kind of reframe the narrative and start telling a story about how, the founder provided the seed money for us to really get on our feet. Here's our hopes and dreams. She is capped at this amount, and we would really love this grant to try to, pilot this new program. And then we started getting the funding. So that's kind of both sides.
Well, that's why we reorganized.
Yeah. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would think we're getting close on time. I think the one takeaway I would want to take from today is the thing I just brought up with the overhead crisis, and it's end of the year, Christmas time's coming up, everybody's trying to give, and one thing I was just kind of thinking about as I've been looking for support, everybody's been looking for support for our for the podcast, shifting expectations with supporters and donors like this. The overhead crisis that a lot of people suffer with, and I'm like finding myself trying to structure all the people that I'm going to solicit, like that all of the money's going to go into like just what it costs to produce the podcast, what it costs to help market the podcast, what it costs to get the word out. I'm like, that's like the focus, and I think it seems viable growth, like a viable growth strategy as opposed to going anywhere else. And if I get any rebuttals on like, what percentage of my donation goes to the cause versus overhead? Like, have you ever had any rebuttals from donors that you were talking to at either where you were the board or you? Like, why is this money not going to the person that's getting sexually abused? Like, I'm viewing it like as a sales process. Like, what's like the rebuttal?
Yeah, I mean, I think for a podcast, you're in a really interesting position because you're not working directly with people who have been sexually abused. Right. What you're doing is you're creating a tool for awareness building. Mm-hmm. So your entire project, is overhead, if you will.
Yeah, right. But it is the program.
Exactly.
Programmatic. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. I think my rebuttal, when I've encountered this has been, similar to what we've already said, whereas someone's like, oh, I want this money to go right to people. And my answer is, well, those people wouldn't be helped if we couldn't maintain this business. And guess what? In order to stay a business, we need to file our taxes. We need to get audited. We need to pay for medical insurance for our employees. Mm-hmm. We need to keep the lights on. So, if you can't appreciate that, then here we go. Right. And, I haven't been so direct. I haven't used that tone, but, I think I can paint a really good picture for someone very easily. As soon as you challenge that belief, it kind of comes crumbling down because it's not logical. I think it's just this this thing that we have just been telling ourselves, that's kind of really what the book is all about, highlighting all these examples of nonprofits being punished for spending money on fundraising, despite the fact that they made way more money than, they came out ahead. And so I think there's just this kind of implicit bias against nonprofits spending money on anything but directly helping people. And it's like, well, guess what? We exist to directly help people. So I've had several encounters over the last decade where I've poked a little bit of a hole in it and, just sort of share my perspective. And then they're like, oh, yeah. And it's pretty easy because it makes sense, It just makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. I do wonder, though, Derek, as I look at the younger generation and working with young professionals, and even look at my own kids, they're so much more connected to mission. They're committed to causes that are so different than the way I felt at their same age, at least from what I can tell. I do wonder, as these young professionals grow into donors, grow into board members, if it will flip to where they do expect more. Hey, I give $1. I want to see it go directly to the mission. I want to see the results, which could be a little bit different than maybe somebody that, like myself, where I'm at and how I have grown up and the things that I was exposed to. I think this younger group of individuals, there's a difference in how the thinking is, and a little bit self-centered in some ways, but also just the amazing energy they put into causes. It's fascinating. It's invigorating, but it'll be, see how does that translate to when they start giving out dollars. Is it going to be different than their expectations?
I'm crossing my fingers that they all decide to go to business school.
It's a chicken and the egg thing, because you obviously want the young people right now to grow up and be incredibly passionate about making the world a better place.
Yep.
But that, I see exactly what you're saying. That passion is going to cloud. I think they're not going to they're going to be so passionate it's going to cloud their judgment. They're not going to have a holistic picture on how an organization works or how nonprofits work and how they can grow effectively to help more people. And you're totally right. They're going to be like, no, I need that money to go towards this person in need right now.
I don't know.
You don't think so?
No, I think, what I see in like my Gen Z friends and colleagues, which, Tom, I don't know how old your kids are, but I see a really amazing vigor in them. I see the passion, and I think they're going to be one of the most socially active generations we've ever seen. But I also see that they really demand a certain standard for themselves. I think there's sort of, and I consider myself a millennial. I think in my age group, maybe a little bit Gen X, I think we've sort of grown up with this stigma that is also talked about in the book that, in order to do good, you can't make a lot of money or shouldn't ask for money. And, like a lot of other things that I think my generation has grown up with, I think Gen Z is really challenging. So I actually think they are going to find a way to both do really well, demand more for that, and be really, really smart about the way that they support causes, whether they're working in the nonprofit sector or not. And so I think they're going to take us all for a ride.
Well, you saw the light. You decided you needed to go to business school.
Well, I don't know if I would say I saw the light. I think I got an opportunity and I took it.
Do you think there'll be a shift with, like another point they talk about in the book is typically the more competent you are, the better you get rewarded in the free market. Do you think that there'll be a shift where there'll be as many talented people in social impact areas as opposed to the for-profit areas?
Maybe not as many. I think it'll be a slow transition, but I think there will be more. Yeah, totally. Not to be pessimistic about it, but I think simply because I think a lot of the small nonprofits won't make it.
Yeah.
And we're going to have a lot bigger conglomerates that have eaten up their smaller counterparts that are going to be able to offer better compensation and more infrastructure and stuff. So simply for that reason, I think yes.
I remember one of the things I remember Ernie said last podcast was, he's like, you take a private equity perspective, you just roll them up and smoke them. That was his exact words.
His exact words were, people think small is better.
Yeah.
But is it?
Yeah, it's actually a great idea, bro.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Well, I think the fact that we've spent some time on this issue of generational divides in terms of thinking reminds me of one thing that I did want to cover in terms of supporting the podcast. Derek, you were mentioning at the beginning about a portal. Can you just explain for old farts like me who are going like, wait a minute, they have a subscription base. Now they've got a portal. Could you just kind of like outline real quick the different ways that we could be supported financially in case anybody other than me is confused?
So yes, we're currently soliciting sponsorship for the podcast. So that's one way you can support us. We're also, you can do through our Patreon page, you can sign up and get a monthly subscription. And what we're going to have in 2024 is we're going to have a donor portal on our website. So if you don't want to sponsor the podcast, there's either way, no matter what, we're going to be able to get you.
Okay, so it offers a third option.
Right. If you just want to make a one-time donation, you could do that through our website, and that'll be all set up.
And that's when you would use the portal.
Yes.
As opposed to the Patreon subscription base or, well, don't pick it over sponsorship, please, but...
Yeah, and all our social media pages are live, but we're getting our YouTube page up and running. So if you're not going to, you could at least support us by sharing, liking, subscribing us everywhere, all the time, every day, at Christmas dinner.
Yeah, and I would like to just make a quick mention, too, that the podcast team has grown. We have 2 support people now, Taylor Dalton and
Caitlin Capelli.
Kate and Capelli. They're here. We just made them move because they were on camera. So, it's growth. We've got, the team keeps growing. The mission keeps spreading. What else can you ask for at the end of a year, at the end of a really weird year?
Well, I'll wait till next year. Wait till our politics start coming into play. That's going to be a whole podcast itself, right?
Oh, God damn.
I was trying to end on a positive note.
It's all going to be good.
You ruined it.
Life is good. Life is good.
Thank you for tuning in today, folks, and we'll be back every month in 2024.
See you in 2024.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.